all. Welcome to the.
I don't
Okay.
think I'm all set now. Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Dan.
All right. Good.
He froze up. He's muted. You're muted, Dan.
Okay, so just like I do in some of my business meetings, I was muted and talking to myself. Good evening. Welcome to our Growth Planning Committee October 20th meeting. We'll start off the meeting as we normally do with the introduction of members and guests. I'm Dan Saunders. Janet?
Janet Powell.
I'm Paul Hogan.
Jim Fitzgerald.
James McMahon.
So we have a quorum.
We have a quorum. And in the, we have Werner, I believe you're there?
Yep, I am here.
Excellent. And guests, Tom and Liz, are we here?
Yep, Liz Durfee here.
All right. Okay. Is Tom with us or?
He's muted.
He's muted? He's doing my trick?
He's here and muted.
Okay. Welcome, Tom.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Ah, San Francisco.
Yes.
Yes. Get a lot of traveling done in this COVID time.
Oh, I want to take advantage of the situation. Get good airfares, plane to yourself.
You're dressed for the beach from last week.
Well, it's because I was in the Cayman Islands.
Okay, so first on our agenda is a discussion of the draft energy chapter, chapter 10.
Well, what I would like to do is we have a PowerPoint slide to, put up some graphics, make it distill the subject into easy modules. And I'd like to share the screen. I'm going to try that right now. I assume I have permission to do so, or?
You do.
Okay.
See how we make out with this. Let's see. I'm having trouble getting the file into the window here. Why don't you guys chat about something? It might take me a minute to sort this out, figure it out.
Let's talk about Tom.
Well, we could do item number 3 if you want on the agenda while you're
Yeah, that's a good
while
one.
Tom's trying to pull it. Tom, did you hit the? Oh, it
There
looks
we
like.
go.
Oh, there we
Oh,
go.
that's a subdivision in Seabrook, New Hampshire. Wrong file.
Oh,
Okay.
Almost.
that is a floor plan.
Why don't you chat while I figure this
Okay.
out?
So good point, Liz. We do need to set a date for our next meeting because Tuesday is the next Tuesday, first Monday in November, or first Tuesday in November will be voting day.
Correct.
I'd recommend we schedule that for either the following Tuesday or go with one meeting in November on the third Tuesday. What do the members think?
Checking the calendar.
Actually, I'm not sure. Is it following Tuesday, the second Tuesday? Is that even available to us, Warner?
So I know we try to manage a number of different schedules
Yeah.
here. I don't have access to what's what's on the internal calendar there, with Arlene. But the other consideration is going to be our videographers,
Right.
our tech support folks. So I think the initial thought is that we stick to,
Stick to the schedule.
which would be the 17th.
Okay.
That way we don't, upset the
Right.
balance that we've try to create here with everybody.
Okay. Yeah, you know, I wasn't thinking that when I said it. Okay, so really then, I guess our option is just to do the third Tuesday, so one meeting in November.
Sounds good.
But we can do, okay, but we could review 2 chapters if they're ready, I guess. You know, so we kind of keep on schedule. That's something we could chat about, and we can maybe follow up later if we don't have that answer for tonight. Okay,
Sounds good.
okay. Fourth thing on the agenda, Tom, I'll keep talking until you're ready to go.
Oh, I'm looking at the screen. I thought I figured it out. Can you guys see it?
Yeah, we can.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
Yep.
so I'm ready.
all right, we'll go back to 2. You're on.
Okay, excellent. Chapter 10, energy. A little background, we were working on this in February and early March, and we were just wrapping up when the pandemic came into the United States and everything stopped. So we're picking it up now 6 months later. And this is, everybody recognize what this illustration is? It's a prototype for an offshore windmill.
Claventus?
That's it. Yes, it is. Yeah. It's, one of the first such facilities in the United States. Let's see. And these are the chapter contents. I guess I'd also like to, say what we say with every chapter we're presenting is that our schedule originally, we had intended to engage the public fairly early on in the process, but circumstances got in the way, including the pandemic. So we're putting some ideas out there for you, but we fully, intend to return to all these chapters after we've engaged the public, so that we get something that reflects better what folks in Kennebunkport are aiming for the future. But anyways, here's the contents, or some of the contents. We start off on kind of a macro scale. We look at Maine in the context of the United States, and we drill our way down until we get to the local level. But as you can see, we're looking at what type of energy sources are available indigenous to Maine, and then compare that with what Mainers are actually consuming for energy. It's not always a good match. And what kind of fuels are driving electricity generation. And of course, one of our goals is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in ways that are practical and reasonable. And then we're going to take a look at a lot of activity at the state level in the last year and a half. There's been a lot of effort to really push Maine in the forefront for energy and greenhouse gas reductions. And then we look at the goals that the state is setting, renewable portfolios. Those are the percentage of renewable energy that each state in New England is committed to, including Maine. We're going to take a look at the potential for solar in Kennebunkport. It's, there's a few challenges because the land area of the town is fairly small, and you want to, if you do want to site solar farms, you want to do it in a way that makes sense. Then wind, of course, is a big item in the Gulf of Maine. That's going to be huge in the coming years, and they're starting to get going on that. Then there's things people can do right at home, and that's talk about energy efficiency in their homes and their appliances. What can be done at the local level to move the needle in terms of making the community more resilient and more energy efficient? When I say community, I mean not just the municipality, but all the residents and businesses as well. And then we discuss electrification. I mean, presumably once you get all your electricity coming from renewable sources, you can transition over to technology that is more efficient, within your own homes. So you guys just tell me to pause if anyone wants to jump in and have a question or comment. So New England states vary quite a bit in terms of what type of resources they have available within the state. Maine is 100% renewable. Not to say you consume 100% renewable, certainly don't. But in terms of the energy Maine generates, you don't have any coal mines or oil wells. You have a lot of biomass, hydropower, and wind. And you add it up, it's 100%, same as Vermont and Rhode Island, but those are a different mix. And you get states like Connecticut here, and you've got nuclear power plants driving a lot of the program. Let's see. Oh, wrong way. So like I was saying, consumption's a different story. Maine is a big consumer of petroleum. A couple of reasons is you don't have much in the way of access to natural gas, and the state is spread out more. It's more rural than the other New England states, so that people have to drive further, even for routine trips, and that means a lot of the energy consumption is gasoline, diesel driving motor vehicles. The fuel that's we heat our houses in. I don't know what your screen looks like. I have you guys lined up at the top. It's blocking out Kennebunkport. Is it happening with you guys too?
Oh, I can see it.
You can see it.
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to go by memory. What Kennebunkport stands out is a higher percentage reliance on propane for heating and cooking.
Yes.
More so in the county and more so than the state. And of course, it's quite a bit more than what you'd see in southern New England. You won't see much or any natural gas in Kennebunkport because there's only one gas line really that comes down from Nova Scotia running into southern New England. And if you happen to be along the corridor, you can tap into it. But Kennebunkport is just outside the corridor, so you've missed that opportunity. It used to seem like a good opportunity. I know I used to be a fan of natural gas until I realized what was happening to the atmosphere. But it was plentiful and it was inexpensive where I lived. But Maine, because they don't have access to that, you guys are much more reliant on fuel oil to heat your homes and propane. And the fuel oil you can see is in the yellow bar up above.
Mm-hmm.
Then looking at a 20-year trend here, where coal has disappeared entirely from the picture, oil is a thin blue line at the very top of the graph. This is from left to right. You're looking at a 20-year span, 2000 to 2019. Renewables are slowly increasing. Natural gas is going gangbusters during that period, but anticipate we're going to see that the trend after 2020 is the renewables are going to expand quite a bit, and the natural gas will shrink. Of course, nuclear, so long as the plants don't close, they're going to stay pretty much the same. And here's your energy mix. I was talking before about the biomass, wind, and hydro. And the source here is United States Energy Information Administration. This is the state of Maine what we're looking at here. And then we're looking at the percentage of emissions by sector. That's how the EIA analyzes every state in the country. So we're comparing the United States with Maine. And you can see what I was saying before is because it's a rural state, people drive further and we're more time on the road. They're sending more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And that's the blue bars down at the bottom.
Hey, really quick, where do wood pellets, does the wood pellet burning, does that fall into the wood category?
Biomass, right?
Yeah, that would be biomass.
Okay. I was kind of surprised at the trend. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And then here's another graph that tracks the emissions over time. This is a 30-year period, and this is produced by state of Maine. They do this every other year, I believe, and they've been tracking it. And you can see the transportation is bouncing around, but it's the greatest contributor to emissions. The electric utilities are up and down as is residential. And then this is one of the big changes I was talking about. Does anybody know where we're looking at here? What this room is? Where we are?
Tom, I have a question. Can you,
Go back.
yeah, jump back one screen there.
Okay.
So I'm looking at that big spike, in terms of electric utilities that we had in the early 2000s there.
Yes.
And do you know what it was that prompted that spike and then the drop that we've seen since then?
I don't know, Werner.
I bet it was oil prices.
Could have been.
I think that was about the time I assume. I know when I built my house, even around 2009, it was still pretty high, but I don't know.
When did the nuclear plant go down?
Wiscasset?
Yeah. What year was that?
It seemed like a long time ago.
18, 20 years ago?
Yeah.
Or more?
Yeah, I think it's more.
I think it was about that time. That's all about the time that deregulation hit too,
Yeah.
for the electric power energy.
It could have been a housing issue as well, because I remember when oil prices went out of the, in the 70s, that's when they started building all these condos with electric heat.
Yeah. My takeaway from this chart is over the last 20 years, the trend is looking good in every sector except transportation.
Yeah, no, I think that's kind of the takeaway. I was curious as to what was the contributing factor to the electric utility spike in the early 2000s.
Yeah,
But
probably
that's all.
oil prices are good. Maybe we hit some cold winters. We
Yeah.
blocked out my memory.
I just quickly looked up the date that the nuclear plant in Wiscasset closed, and it was 96, and that's right where it started going
Oh,
up.
yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, my memory's not so bad, Dale.
That's
Well
okay.
done, Donna.
Guys ready for the next one?
Sure.
Yep.
I call this Starship Enterprise just because I could hear Captain Kirk, intoning in the background, but it really is. This is the Maine Climate Council. And this is one of I think this is their second big meeting they had. This is January 2020 and it's up in Augusta. And you can see there's a lot of interest, a lot of players, there's a lot of environmentalists in the room and lobbyists and politicians and academics. So it was a pretty interesting mix, a lot of energy and a lot of agendas being pushed around. And, the pandemic came, but that didn't really slow them down. They just stopped meeting in the enterprise here. They've been meeting on Zoom ever since. And they have this is the gathering of, most of the players. This is a common gathering, but they have 6 distinct committees working on different aspects of the problem. So a year and a half, 2 years ago, the government in Maine did a pretty significant shift in terms of policy, and they were very aggressive in adopting new policies. And it's pretty interesting, but even if you don't agree with this stuff or don't like it, you really got to know what's going on because the state's going to do it anyways. But this list here gives you a sense of what they're striving for, what their tentative goals are. You can see they're going to have a statewide climate action plan in a couple months, at least that's their schedule. And they've set some very aggressive greenhouse gas emission goals. We'll see later in the slide show that they're more aggressive than some of the other New England states. Certainly more aggressive than New Hampshire, which I'm familiar with. And these are goals, and what the Climate Council's been doing is figuring out the nuts and bolts of how to make it happen, how to get from here to there. And you can bet that at least some of the load is going to be carried by municipalities. And folks like you, they're gonna ask you to play a part in getting there. And it went on for 2 slides. I mean, I'm more familiar with these goals now, but when I first saw what they were doing, I said, "Whoa, these are pretty ambitious people." 100,000 new electric heat pumps for residential installations. Everybody familiar with heat pumps?
Yeah.
I have geothermal heating.
Oh, cool. Okay. Well, my gas-fired boiler is about to die, so I'm looking into heat pump myself. I'm learning all about it.
Mhm.
And
We have a couple heat pumps.
yeah, we went from very few large-scale solar arrays to the restrictions have been lifted, and they're going to be allowing solar farms is up to 100 megawatts, which is like 500 acres. Nothing quite that large has been proposed, but they've got some pretty big ones in the pipeline. And of course, they've opened up net metering too, which will encourage the solar industry. And down here at the second to last bullet, they ordered the PUC to approve Aquaventus. It's kind of means that thing will be selling electricity for the next 20 years. And here are the specific goals laid out in a graph. 2010, the state's goal was simply to emit no more gases than they did in 1990. They figured they'd be pretty good, doing well if they brought it to 1990 levels. And then after that, they got ambitious. They, for 2020, their goal is 10% less than that, and they're doing better than that. They're beating that goal right now. And you can see down at the bottom in the lower right, the 2050 goal is to get 80% less than 1990. So that's an ambitious goal, and so far they're on track. Of course, this historically in the last 10, 20 years, there's been a lot of back and forth with the politicians saying, well, you know, if you invest in environmental efforts, or if you force people to reduce greenhouse gases, that's going to hurt the economy. Maine DEP has done an analysis that says, well, that's not true. Here's a graph that shows, on the one hand, the greenhouse gases coming down and the gross domestic product doing quite well, at least right up until the epidemic. This report was issued in 2018. So when they graph 220, it's going to look a little different than this. Renewable portfolio standards. Each of the New England states tells their utilities, you gotta generate a certain percentage of the electricity through renewable means. And they of course they've raised the bar further out, with the idea being, they're going to be more aggressive in the coming decades on reducing greenhouse gases. And you can see Maine was kind of up through 2020, Maine was kind of in the pack. Vermont was the only outlier. Vermont was way out there. So they burn a lot of wood chips and hydropower. But the rest of 5 other New England states up until 2020 were pretty much within the 10 to 20% range. And then you had a shift in power in Augusta. And of course, Maine just shot to the dramatic increase. As you can see, it's the green bar in this graph. And New Hampshire, New Hampshire's holding steady at the lowest. The legislature's going one way and the governor's going the other, and so far the governor's said just enough to veto the bills. And this graph here, ISO New England put together. This is before the shift in Augusta. This is when both New Hampshire and Maine had very little solar power. But during the 2010s, the other New England states were encouraging, and Massachusetts was providing heavy subsidies. So you can see that it shows the solar development in the last 20 years. And I think New Hampshire is going to continue to look the same for a while, but there's been a lot of interest in solar farms in Maine in the past year. And a little picture over on the left says, some people say, well, we're too far north, to be, rely on solar power. It's not reliable at this latitude. And the Natural Resources Council of Maine says, well, that's not really true. Florida isn't much better than Maine. Maine's well situated for solar. Oops, go ahead, yeah. And here's ISO New England. I think if you're not familiar with who they are, they kind of regulate the electric grid for New England. And they do a lot of analyses to make sure everybody's rowing the boat in the same direction. This is their projections. They said in 8 years, you can see we're going to have the solar generation more than double. And actually, a lot of that's going to be coming out of Maine.
Hey, Tom,
Yes.
when is the report supposed to come from this Maine, I forget the exact name of it, commission that's been investigating it for, a year and a half? They're supposed to issue a report. So when would we know here, when's that report coming out? And we would know what the impact, what the expectations, what the goals are for, municipalities, home energy, et cetera.
Good question, Paul. If you'd asked me 6 months ago, I'd throw an exact date at you. Now I'm going to go by memory.
Okay.
Could be as recent as soon as December 31st, but at the very latest, it's going to be this coming winter.
So they haven't, I think that was the date by the legislation.
Yeah.
Yeah, December 1st, I think.
Yeah. And they have a website. So that's, we could probably find out in a couple minutes, actually. Their website's much improved over what it was a year ago.
Yeah, it's great now.
I did look on the website to see if there were any updates about the report, and I didn't see any about when it's going to be issued.
Yeah. I'm on their mailing list, and they keep sending me out invitations to Zoom meetings to observe and participate. So they seem to be on track.
So just as a matter of process, they issue their report, it goes back to the state, and then the legislature has a choice about what to do in the future. There's no binding effect of this commission. It's just to recommend changes and goals to the legislature, who would then pass laws to say, got to do this, right?
Exactly. I was in the room back in January in Augusta, and I got the sense that, just a lot of political momentum behind this climate council. So I'm anticipating the legislature will probably act quickly and probably be supportive of many of the recommendations.
Unless it changes.
Unless it changes. Okay. Wind energy. The bright red is the average wind speed is 22 miles per hour at 90 meters above the surface of the ocean, which is a lot of wind. I mean, it is one of the, I wasn't aware of this actually until I started really digging into it, but the Gulf of Maine is one of the windiest water bodies in the world, and which is to say it has some of the greatest potential for electrical generation by wind power. And it's just a huge resource. When you look at the numbers, I hesitate to quote them right now, but it's just, the Gulf of Maine, it will generate, 3 or 4 times as much energy as New England could possibly consume. So you've got an enormous resource out there. And it's a matter of, whether you want to tap into it and how soon you do it. We'll discuss some of the pros and cons of that later on, because obviously it's taken this long to get where we are because not everybody thinks it's a good idea. And then there's energy efficiency. American Council for Energy Efficient Economy does a careful grading of all 50 states. And you can see Maine's not doing too bad. Maine's number 15. Well behind California. Probably a good thing.
What does energy efficiency mean, Tom?
It means, for example, they'll have standards for automobiles, as we know California is doing, but mostly it's household appliances. And local building codes and efficiency of heating systems.
Thank you.
And then we've thrown some ideas on the wall here to see things that might be done locally. And that, I want to emphasize, these are just ideas that we're throwing up to start the conversation. Because obviously we haven't done a public engagement that we'd really like to do, and hopefully we'll get a lot of good feedback from the community when that day comes, and this list will look different after we do engage the public. But so the idea is, running through them quickly, is look at strategic density, places in town that might make sense and you might get public support for. Traditional neighborhood development is a technical term planners use, but it's along the same lines. What it basically means is revise the land use regs so that you can have the new development looks somewhat like it did 100 years ago, in a walking community before we got into a zoning that was responsive to motor vehicles. Have the zoning go back to pedestrian oriented communities, which is basically what you have out there already over in the Dock Square area. And then, of course, another land use trick is to put grant developers bonuses for building more dense development in areas that you want more dense development. And on the flip side, you make sure they don't do it in the rural areas where you don't think building's a good idea. Requiring LEED certification for commercial development. I know you don't get a lot of commercial development in Kennebunkport, but if you do, that's another step you can take. It's pretty easy. Upgrade those streetlights to LED. I threw that on there, but I'm frankly not familiar where the town stands at the moment, whether that's already been done or they're thinking about it or it's been proposed before. Can have municipal incentives to new solar installations. One incentive would be to exempt them from property taxes for the cost of the solar installation. So they're not going to get being paid property taxes for putting the solar panels on the roof. And another one is I would like to, Liz and I would like to explore the possibility of larger scale solar farms in town. It may not be a good idea in Kennebunkport. It just may not be any good sites for it, but I think it's something worth exploring. And if you do find some good sites, then you want your regulations to be able to, like you would for any non-residential installation, you'd want to make sure it was done right and use some regulatory framework to make sure that happens. And then another idea is, of course, to get more ambitious with off-road trails for bicyclists, pedestrians, and people exercising. Electrical vehicle charging stations. There are 3 different types of chargers: level 1, 2, and 3. Level 1 and 2 are basically domestic operations. So you get an electrical vehicle and you plug it in at night, and by the morning it's all charged up and you drive off. Level 3 is a relative new technology that you can charge your electric vehicle in 1 or 2 hours, and that kind of opens up all kinds of possibilities. In that, for example, if you had a cluster of level 3 charging stations in the area of Dock Square, you could encourage people, the tourists who visit, the ones who drive in electrical vehicles, to charge it while they're shopping or having lunch. It would make your local tourist businesses more of an attractive destination for out-of-state people driving electric vehicles. On the left, I'm sure you recognize that one. That's at the fire station. On the right is what level 3 charging stations look like. I took this photograph down in Seabrook, New Hampshire. Those were installed about 6 years ago. And if you're an electric vehicle owner, you're probably familiar with this website called PlugShare. And before you get in your car and drive off into the woods and realize that your battery's running down and there's no charger anywhere around, the idea is you go on this website and they'll show you where the chargers are no matter where you are. And this is what they show for the Dock Square area over on the right side of the map there. You can see a lot of the hospitality industry in Kennebunkport they were clued in early on. They said, this is a good thing. This is going to help attract business to my hotel, bed and breakfast. And that's what all these green charger icons stand for. Those are, they were installed privately by the hotels. Well, what's missing from this picture, of course, is what I mentioned a moment ago, and that's the level 3 chargers. They'll get the day trippers. You know, these green ones would work well if you're staying overnight at a bed and breakfast. But because they take 6 to 8 hours to charge your vehicle, it doesn't make any sense for somebody driving to Kennebunkport in the daytime. And that's something you might want to explore, is that you make your Dock Square area more appealing to these day trippers if you have a level 3 charger there. The whole cluster of them. And then here's Efficiency Maine has put together and they keep it, this analysis is constantly updated. They're tracking the cost of heating your home with various fuels and various technology. And it shows you, you know, that the propane and natural gas are kind of the more expensive options, and that electric and firewood are the least expensive. And, you know, there's a range of other technologies and fuels in between there. So that's where we are in terms of our energy chat. We're open to start a conversation, you guys, on some of this. I hope we've prompted some questions and comments and ideas.
Nice job, guys.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
A lot of information in there.
Yes, there is. And the written chapter is has quite a bit more, actually. This is kind of like a summary, kind of a succinct version.
You know, one of the things that we deal with as folks are moving towards, you know, using more heat pumps and, you know, and things of that nature. Now, granted, they've gotten a lot more efficient, and so, you know, that's why I think we're starting to see them more and more as primaries. But I guess, Tom, you know, one of the questions I have is, you know, how and who is having the conversation with CMP as it relates to the reliability of their, you know, of their power grid? You know, because I think that's one of the things that we experience here in town is, you know, especially during winter storms. You know, I mean, we get power outages on a pretty regular basis, and, you know, and I think that's, you know, been you know, that's a little bit of a detractor towards, you know, going principally, you know, towards heat pumps. You know, we do get a lot of inquiries from folks on standby generators, you know, home generators, and I think that's, you know, where folks have been headed, you know, to realistically combat the infrastructure issues that CMP has.
Burner, but your oil burner or your gas burner doesn't work either. Your propane burner doesn't work either. So there really is a disadvantage to a heat pump in that regard. You do, you know, if you have some kind of backup, that's great.
Yeah, yeah, it's yeah. I mentioned the ISO before. That's why they were created, because back 30, 40 years ago, reliability was becoming an issue, and the whole purpose of that organization is to improve reliability and push the utilities to do what needs to be done. Sounds like they need to have some work to do in Kennebunkport, though. The other thing I was thinking too, Werner, is historically the model for electrical distribution is you have one large power plant far away, and it sends the electricity out over long distances. And of course, that long distance doesn't enhance reliability because stuff can happen to the wires on the way.
Right, right.
I think you know, I believe that, and I think this is where the future is too, is a decentralized system where you have smaller generating plants that are closer to the consumer. Or maybe the Kennebunkport's problem is not to rely on generation that's so far away, and see what you guys can do to get get some of it in town.
Yeah, so talk a little bit about that. I know there was, that there was some legislation around, and I think this was geared specifically towards some of the island communities that was going to allow for, what sounded like a fairly deregulated, microgrid legislation that was coming about that was, again, I think it was geared more towards, the island communities that were, that were really reliant on these, underwater transmission lines that made them especially vulnerable. But I don't know how much you all have, have heard or been following any of that legislation.
I haven't followed the legislation, but from what I've seen, there's a gradual trend towards decentralization, and one of the reasons is it's more reliable. Those communities that do have, a lot of acreage that can support solar farms, they're in a good position because, the solar is inexpensive and you can put it, close by. It doesn't have to travel long distance.
Yeah, it's still using the same infrastructure though to get the power to the, from that farm that's
Right.
10 miles down the road to the power plant that's up in the hydroelectric power plant up in Quebec. It's still using the same delivery. There's less lines, but the real issue seems to be, in Kennebunkport specifically, infrastructure issues. I mean, we just had a drizzle the other day and took out power for 4 hours at the house.
Yeah, and we're not the only town like that.
Yeah,
And
but
Kennebunk, which buys its power, has its own power company except for Lower Village. Their reliability, I mean, I haven't seen the official statistics, but if you talk to anybody who lives there, they have a much more reliable system than we do.
oh yeah,
It's
yeah, I
managed.
lived there for a while, and they definitely do.
Yeah,
And
no,
that-
I can speak to that for sure. I mean,
Oh,
you
you
know,
live there.
yeah, I haven't. I mean, I've not felt. Well, I don't want to jinx myself, but I've not felt the need to, invest in having a backup generator for the house. Because when, I mean, I can't tell you a time when the power has been out for more than 2 or 3 hours at most. And usually we find out later on it was, some squirrel that got, into a transformer. But I think a lot of it is just maintenance, has been, Kennebunk Light and Power took for a long period of time, took a really proactive stance in terms of, line maintenance and, encouraging property owners to go underground, with their house services.
And we've kind of had this hidden tax where anyone who can afford to puts in a generator to make up for the deficiencies in the system.
Exactly.
The state law used to be, which was written by CMP and their other one up north, basically made it impossible for towns to ever withdraw from the system because there was no negotiation of price. There was no arbitration system. So if a town wanted to bail out and, after deregulation, wanted to do their own thing, CMP dictated the price, because that's the way they wrote the law, which our legislatures passed, on what it would cost to get out. And it would be impossible for any new system to be able to pay that price. I think that law has changed in the past year and a half to allow a more reasonable buyout price. I know they were going in that direction. I'm not sure what happened to it. But it basically was impossible for any town to break away.
Right.
If you hadn't done it 50 years ago, before they controlled the legislature.
That was probably to cover all their quote stranded costs that they had endured in building their power plants.
Sure,
And
sure.
then sold off, and then that was the gap they had to make up. But at some point, that's paid for.
But that
It should be
certainly, it raises the question, for community solar or, other alternatives to bring down the cost of operating a house here, which is very expensive. That chart on electrification is, I think, an eye-opener for many people to see the comparative costs which I was shocked when I first saw it on their website. It might, I don't know. I know that if you put in I know Maine now, if you put in a heat pump, not only can you get, like a grand worth of credit from Maine, a rebate, you can also get a, low interest loan from the state, available without regard to income to help you finance it. So
Yep.
Yeah, Maine has some great incentives for that.
just
Yeah,
start.
they do. Just started.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking into it myself, and I'm three-quarters of a mile from Maine, which is like, I'm out of luck.
Yeah, I was in a big box store.
We have a
I was in a
couple
big-
here, and I just want to tell you, they're incredibly wonderful. They really are. You can set each individually. You can take the moisture out of the air. You can put heat, air, AC in. And they're just incredibly great products.
You speak from experience, Jim, huh?
Well, we've had them for a couple of years now, and they're really super.
And what manufacturer you go with?
I think these are Mitsubishi.
Oh yeah, that's what I'm looking at.
I have Fujitsu.
Those are good units.
So tell me about solar. You guys know your way around town a lot better than I do. Are we chasing windmills here with, looking for a place to put small solar farms? Can you imagine some places in town that would work well?
The best place, which I've talked to Werner about, which is a little more complicated, is the old town dump transfer station, because you wouldn't have to chop down a forest to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And it is near the line. You have to be within a half mile or 3/4 of a mile from the line. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's, I think whether a private developer did it or the town did it, if there was a way to do it and bring down energy costs for locals, we're trying to provide affordable housing for people in another chapter. And one way to do that is to bring down the cost of heating your home.
Mm-hmm.
So if you had, I saw you with, you mentioned LEED standards for commercial, but I would push and say, well, why not some incentive for LEED standards for residential? Somehow, it costs a little more to do it up front, but you end up costing a lot less to maintain a home. There are a lot of passive solar houses going up in town and the next town and in Arundel, that have very, very low energy cost operating.
That's an intriguing concept, Paul. What's everybody else think of recommending LEED for residential?
I came up with the same, during the presentation, I said, why not for residential as well? It might take some real negotiation and some convincing, but it certainly makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
Look at California. You can't build a house unless you have solar. Their regulations are incredible, but LEED is a lot easier to do. And again, I think the tax incentives for that type of construction are very, very attractive, because the state and the federal government both give tremendous tax credits for installation of energy saving features. So I think it's a great idea.
I do too. Do you think the townspeople would support it?
Well, one of the things that you have to keep in mind whenever you're looking at, different building standards is, it all has to pass through the lens of the Maine Uniform Building Code. And so, with the adoption of that, any, towns that have adopted, the Maine Building Code, essentially have agreed to follow those standards. And, once you adopt that, towns aren't really able to develop their own types of building codes and energy codes. But with that being said, there is discussion and there's a movement towards, offering up an option of what's referred to as a stretch code as it relates to energy efficiency. Now, I haven't seen any of the specific language in terms of what that means. But I know from just looking at at future code cycles, it's not going to be too long before Maine is going to see some significant changes in how construction is done, just to be able to meet some of the future energy efficiency and insulation codes that are coming down the pike. So it's something that's happening. But the way Maine is built in, we look at updated codes every 2 years. And so there's an automatic build-in terms of a rotation, of following the codes, or because what what the state didn't want, and what was discussed years ago whenever MUBEC came into place, was that there was a desire to make sure that those codes remained somewhat current. What we didn't want is we didn't want to get a code that was, from the early 2000s and then sit with that code for the next 20 years, without some type of update or having to go through, massive legislative change every time, those codes wanted to be updated. So there's kind of, there's an automatic, uptick into the latest, well, not necessarily the latest, but I think we're looking at, right now the state's looking to go forward with the 2015, energy code. So like I said, there's a lot of, there's a cycle, that's already built in. I haven't seen what the stretch code would entail. But I will say that, coming into the future, you're going to see some significant changes for how construction is done. And I think, you're going to see it you're going to see a lot more, double wall construction, in terms of being able to meet our values for your interior walls. You're going to start to see a lot more, ERV systems, are going to need to, you're going to start to see the need for more and more of those installed in homes, just to deal with, fresh air intake, and dealing with moisture, moisture control in the house once you tighten it up, to such a degree. So it's getting more complicated, but it's all in the, the name of efficiency, is the reason, why those things are headed the way they're headed.
Just wanted to tell you that our project out in Wells, I have completely solar homes. I have some solar, mixed solar with heat pumps. I have total heat pumps. 4 heat pumps will, and usually they're built for the hard winter. 4 of those will take you through the winter. But there's all kinds of things to see out there. I have air handling units and everything else in most of the units out there. All outside walls are insulated. A lot of very highly efficient things are going on right in our own backyard. So if you ever wanted to see some of that, I'm sure I could arrange to make it done.
What project is this, Jim?
This is the Millbrook Farms out at right off the Depot Road in Wells. So it's right at the end of where you come out Route 9 onto Route 1.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Werner, are you saying, I understand what you're saying about the building code and the building code evolving, and that likely to happen. But what about municipal incentives, like not taxing certain things, or, like if you put in a new heat pump versus a replacement furnace, the fee is X versus Y, or you are not, assessed on the incremental value of, this, that, or the other thing. It's not changing the building code. It's just offering incentives to achieve the town's objectives of reducing greenhouse gas.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's those are all good strategies. To think of, and I can tell you there's constant debate that I see amongst I'll just we'll pick on the tax assessors for a minute. There's constant debate about the types whether or not municipalities should be whether or not you tax a heat pump or whether or not you tax a solar installation and things of that nature. I can tell you that there's a lot of varying opinions amongst assessors as to whether or not you tax those. Some communities do, some communities don't. I think generally speaking, the state would tell you that and I think the book answer is that the state would tell you to tax it, but whether or not a local municipality does that, everybody's got a different practice and a different opinion on those things.
Yeah.
I mean, we have built within the software. I mean, there's always, there's, based on the type of, heat that you use in your house, that does adjust the overall construction value, let's say. So in terms of, say the cost per square foot, if I were to put a house in the system and say, it has electric baseboard heat, for example, that would have an influence factor towards the, replacement cost of the home, as opposed to if it was a, I don't know, just, a geothermal system, that might generate a different value towards the overall, cost, replacement cost of the home. Some towns go the next step and assess an additional tax, or on top of that for individual units. My opinion, on it is that the value of that already gets picked up in the initial value of the house to begin with. That house isn't going to be worth X if you don't heat it. And so, it's pretty hard to look at someone and tell them, they're valued at $250 a square, and then you're going to throw another, $5,000 or $10,000 value on top of that just because they have a heat pump. But you'll find different opinions in different towns. So it's not applied, it's not necessarily applied consistently throughout the state. Which is tricky. But I agree. There's work that needs to be done at the legislative end, relative to exemptions for things like solar, and things of that nature, for sure. In the grand scheme where Kennebunkport has a pretty low mill rate, like it's a, even if you have a $5,000 value, it's a pretty minimal, cost on a person's tax bill. But I think, it's as much the spirit of what you're trying to achieve as much as anything, as much as it's the dollars and cents.
Yeah. My only concern on something like that is those folks who can't afford to do the heat pumps. They end up in a way helping to subsidize someone else's heat. And so I'd rather not do something from a municipality standpoint. Certainly if the state wants to throw it in for the feds, that's fine, but I'd rather not, be shuffling tax money around in this regard. Because there are a whole lot of people that can't afford the heat pumps, and they're happy they have an oil furnace that works to keep them warm in the winter, or a wood stove.
Yeah, I mean, that is always the catch-22 with, anytime you do some type of a tax incentive, somebody else is just picking up the, is picking up the bill, for it, You know, you reduce a value, you know, on one end, and somebody else, you know, somebody has to pick up the other end of it.
I kind of agree with you, Dan. I also agree with Paul. I mean, I think, you know, I think some of those solar efficiencies and stuff that we shouldn't be looking at as a luxury. We should try to be looking at it as an affordable option, and not having it as a disadvantage. So I think there's a happy medium that can happen. But I mean, I know building my house, I wanted to have solar, but it just wasn't in the budget. We opted to, you know, do things like pack cellulose insulation, which, you know, made things a lot better for us. So.
Yeah. But anyway, I think the state's doing enough.
The state's doing a lot.
They're doing a lot. Yeah, I think the state's doing a lot that people can take advantage of. They don't think we need to provide any extra incentives in the town for folks to make their homes more energy efficient. That's
It
it.
wouldn't be a bad idea to educate folks, though. I mean,
Oh.
maybe that's something that could certainly come out of our, you know, our outreach in the summer.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with that. 100%.
Werner,
I
what
mean,
about, oh,
I was in a big box store the other day. I won't say who it was, but they had heat pumps there that had the state of Maine efficiency on it, and they were down like $850. You could have walked out of there for $250 with a brand new heat pump
Wow.
for water.
yeah.
Hey, Paul.
Werner, do we tax solar panels?
You know, that's a good question. I mean, I don't believe that we do, but don't take what I just said and hold that as gospel. But I can check with Becky on that.
So I would view that differently than, you know, a heat pump, which would cost somebody $5,000 or $6,000, and then you get a rebate to put in. If someone puts in a solar panel, you know, that essentially helps that person, of course, reduce their own energy costs, but it also, you know, helps achieve the public policy goal of reducing greenhouse gases, which benefits everybody. There's going to be less asthma cases, less illness, less sickness, and maybe we'll just save the planet. So it would seem to me that is not, if you go and tax that, someone puts on $25,000 worth of panels and maybe some batteries, to tax that, you know, would be counter to all the other public policy goals that you would have, that most people in town would probably agree to the goals. Not everybody, but
Yeah.
most people. And I see that as different than a furnace and, you know, but,
Yeah.
you know, why should someone's house value go up for $25,000 because he puts on solar panels?
Yeah, I agree with Paul. It shouldn't be a disadvantage, and it shouldn't be a luxury. We should, you know, if we're going to create an emphasis on it, it should be an opportunity and not a burden or a tax.
A lot of this really helps when you're doing new construction, where you don't need a chimney if you're not going to have a furnace, and if you're just going to use solar. So there's a lot of there's offsetting benefits to the cost of insulation, and of course you do get rebates for a lot of this stuff. I've seen a total solar array where it didn't cost them a dime. There were so many incentives for putting it in.
That's a good point.
Hey, Paul.
Hey, yeah.
Hey, that plan that you described at the dump, was that just for wind power, or was that solar panels?
No, I don't think we probably have the wind on shore there. It would be, I think it's kind of an ideal site, other than the fact that it was a landfill and you have to go through a set of, you know, DEP regulations, which they have for reusing, you know, old landfills.
The reason I asked is I didn't know if there was the thought of doing multi-purpose, if that what he described as far as the wind, to have both in the same spot. But
I have no idea.
Yeah, so, you know, you know, we've had some preliminary conversations with, you know, with folks about, you know, solar installs at the, you know, at the town dump. And, you know, from what I understand from talking to the contractors who deal with these is that, you know, a dump site, you know, is a good, you know, it's a good reuse of, you know, of open land for sure. You know, but what I've also heard them say is that, you know, from a process perspective, that, you know, it's not the first place that you look, you know, in terms of doing your solar installs, that, you know, just basically because of the, you know, the regulatory process of, you know, putting that type of infrastructure on a capped landfill, that you tend to look at your buildings first, you know, and tend to, you know, analyze all the rooftop areas that you have first, just because those are significantly easier to you know, develop for solar before you wind up going, you know, to a landfill site. So
Yeah, but they don't want to do the hard work, Werner. I hate to tell you that. The trend.
I agree with you 100%. You know, it's a lot more work.
Werner, the trend is, as I've seen it, and I followed it for 20, 30 years now, is towards, you know, larger scale tracking. You know, you get like 30-40% more efficiency if you put up a tracking system in you know, on 100 acres or 50 acres or whatever, than you do by putting a few on the municipal building, a few on the fire station, and a few on, you know, whatever. And the thing about community solar, particularly if you get it done by, you know, private industry, which all of a sudden they're running all over the place trying to do this, is that, you know, Joe, who could never afford to get solar on his own roof, can opt into one of these, you know, for nothing, essentially, and get a fixed rate or a guaranteed percentage off. I know I get mailings like 4 times a week now from these, because it's a, you know, it's a wide open market in Maine now. But if you did it as a community thing, it may be you know, help us achieve goals that we could not otherwise achieve here in town, and B, reduce costs for you know, people who live in town who otherwise are paying very high utility rates. Maine has some of the highest utility rates in the country.
Hey, Paul,
Hey, yeah.
do you know if there's any like communities that lease out their like properties like this?
Yeah,
So,
there's all different ways to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I assume that, no, I'm not an expert, but I'm assuming these things can go up somewhat straightforward. They're not like overly complicated to set up, these arrays, right? I mean, I assume they can.
Well, you have to, if you did it on a landfill, you have to deal with the landfill, and there are a certain set of requirements due to that. So you do raise your costs a little bit by having to do that. But
the town of Milton, New Hampshire was looking into quite a few years ago. I remember they had some brownfields assessment funds to look at the landfill site. And it seemed pretty feasible to put a solar installation there. They just, they have to use a slightly different technology that doesn't really drill down into the capped landfill. So, I mean, looking into grant funding from through EPA is an option to help kind of, and working with the state to kind of clear some of those hurdles of a more complex site. And I think that leasing is is gaining in popularity now. I've heard of a couple larger landowners being approached by folks who want to lease some farmland or open space to put up a solar installation. So I think that is growing in popularity.
Yeah.
When did the dump actually close? I've lived here for about 14 years. When did that dump actually close down and get capped over?
long time ago.
Right after the last dump parade.
Yeah.
But it's been sitting. It's not like they mine it or anything. It's been there.
No,
There's no intention to do it.
no. I mean, it's. I mean, we have. You know, we have to monitor it. So there's numerous monitoring wells that are located around the site that you know, that the town, you know, has an engineering firm that comes and checks those, provides, sampling for water, for groundwater quality. It basically checks to make sure that that the cap is intact, and all of that reporting goes to DEP.
I think it's a good idea. I think it's worthy of note on the plan and as an option. So
Yeah, and it's a feasible project for sure. I mean, basically what you wind up doing is that you just have, large concrete slabs that wind up, being at grade,
Right.
that aren't frost protected, but you don't necessarily, frost protection isn't as big a deal on a solar array as it would be on some other building. I mean, they can shift around a little bit, and it's not, it doesn't affect the performance of the panels.
yeah, I'm sure it can move up and down, but I
That's
assume
right.
There's probably room for buildings that aren't actually on
Right.
the landfill itself. So
Yeah. You basically just have to put enough weight on the things so they don't blow away, because, you've got basically big sails that are sitting up on top. And I will say that, the top of the dump there, I mean, that is a windy location, just when you look at the elevation of it,
6
so
inches of concrete,
that's right.
it starts to add weight.
You put enough concrete to it and you can hold it, you can hold quite a bit down.
Yeah. Is there ever any concern of like displacement though? Like, you start adding weight stuff and it displaces, what's under it somewhere else. I don't, that'd be the only concern I could think of with the weight of concrete.
Sure. Yeah. No, you put enough weight on top of it and, you're going to create some pressure somewhere else. And I think
Right.
that's part of the permitting process that, the DEP winds up being involved with, whenever you look at these types of sites that you wouldn't run into if you're dealing with an open field, for example.
I think it sounds like a happy medium, and a plan to utilize property we have to either lease out or meet those goals.
Werner, how many acres does the dump cover?
That's a good question. I can do a quick measurement while you guys are still talking. I can give you a rough idea.
Are you gonna go to the dump and do it?
That's
You'll
right.
be back in 10 minutes.
That's right. I'll be back.
Amazing.
Might as well generate electricity. We can't make a water park out of it.
Right. No, I'll just jump on the GIS and do kind of a rough area calculation.
But I think
I'm hearing a lot of interest in the dump. How about other sites in town that could be potential sites for?
Yeah, I was going to say, there used to be a lot of farms in town. A lot of the farmland is now wooded. What hasn't been developed, as Werner would say, is granite and ledge, and not great. But I think the point is there are farm fields. The soil's pretty lousy by the coast here. You can grow hay, and unless you spend a lot of money, to get soil up, it's really not great farmland. It doesn't drain very well.
Mm-hmm.
It's clay or it's on rock. So there may be, if you had the right code in town that supported solar, it could be that you would see, big open field someplace that could be used for, that someone would take, 20 acres that he currently owns and gets no value out of. He might be able to put up a solar farm.
That's kind of interesting, that people, you see like the signs to tree farms where they get tax incentives for, having the trees, we should encourage people that we should have the same encouragement to, to do this, you have an electrical farm instead of a tree farm.
One thing that appeals to me about the solar farms is they're not as permanent as, say, a residential subdivision or commercial development.
Sure.
If the farmer wants to collect rent for 20 years and then he wants to do something else with the land, go back to agriculture or some other use, the solar infrastructure can be removed pretty readily. You can flip it right back to what it was before.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I
There's
just
some
did a
pretty big. Go ahead, Warner.
Yeah, so I just did a quick measurement, on the GIS, and the area that I would say is that would probably make the most sense is about, it's about 2 acres.
Oh,
There's, and what I didn't necessarily count, just because you've got some really steep slopes there, so, I more or less just took a measurement of the flat area of the top of the dump. You've probably got at least another, 1.5 acres of steep slopes around there, but that wouldn't be appropriate for that kind of.
Werner, I see the steep slopes in Massachusetts on the old landfills now filled with, and
I was going to say,
they go up like that. They
Yeah.
go right up the bottom. I've looked at these for 40 years, these landfills as they closed and then as they sat empty. And now Massachusetts has had great incentives and encouragement. And now they, they flow up and down these hills that were created, over the past 150 years.
Yeah, I think when there's a will, there's a way. I think engineering can be pretty creative. Otherwise, it's just poison. You just have nothing to do with the land. It's just poison. I think that when there's a will, there's a way. There's a creativity there to do it, but it's at what cost, really?
So this idea with putting panels on the dump, who would be the customer? Where would you send the electricity to? Would it be municipality? Would it the immediate neighborhood? Would you put it back in the larger grid?
Well, there's a lot of ways you could do it. You could lease the whole land to Joe, and Joe would, either start a community solar project and sell it to locals, or he would sell it to the grid. He would put a proposal in and sell it to, to CMP. The town could do it, or, some organization created by the town could do it. Some of these you get fixed costs for, that I know of, you get, fixed utility rates. Others, others you just get a discount off of, what CMP standard rate might be. I think there's many models.
There are multiple models, and I guess what I was driving at, I was trying to get a sense if the members of the committee have a preferred model.
Oh, sorry.
I mean, if we're gonna lease it, then it's got to benefit the town. I mean, it's either going to lower our taxes or go towards something like that, or if we're going to use the town property, it's got to benefit the town somehow.
Of course.
That's yeah.
I mean, something, it would have more community support, obviously, if people could see a reduction to their utility costs, to help them over time get away from that oil furnace when it breaks and go to a heat pump. If their utility costs were brought, down. When Maine went all electric, we had nuclear power plants and everybody was incented. It was crazy not to do anything but all electric. And, hopefully we'll get there again, but with a different energy source that's affordable.
Paul, do you know what, if something's built like this and how that energy gets put back in the grid? How does that work? As far as like what CMP or what other regulations?
Well, the new law that allows, community solar essentially says you have to be near an appropriate power line, and then CMP has to allow you to feed it into it. You have to be within a mile or something like that, for you not to have, for it to be efficient. And then it gets fed into CMP, and just like with solar panels, every bit you don't use when it's leaving your house gets put onto the grid, and then you get a credit for everything you dump there, and then it gets distributed. It gets distributed into the grid, and
Right.
the law used to not allow large community solar, but now it does.
How about connection fees, Paul? Is that an issue?
No idea. I'm not an expert on this.
No. I was starting to be impressed by your knowledge of this.
I was just gonna say, sounds good to me.
So I have a kind of related question, just thinking about if the town did use municipal property for solar and was able to, capture some of the benefit and the cost savings for municipal electric demand. I just lost my train of thought. Werner, I thought you may have mentioned that the town did an energy audit at some point, or a greenhouse gas emission audit. Am I making that up, or did you mention that at one point?
That's correct. Yes. Yeah. I mean, we looked at, what the town's impact was, and when I say the town, we're looking at, the town of Kennebunkport infrastructure. So that's, that's like the sewer department, the town hall, highway,
Okay.
the town's, fleet, that we have, those types of things. Yep. Yeah. We did an inventory on that.
Is that something that's floating around that we could take a look at? Because I think that would be interesting to include in the chapter, and then also just to look at, overall tracking how much energy the town is using, and because ultimately, even if residents aren't benefiting from their municipal bills lowering, over the long term, lower costs for the municipality is a benefit for residents too. So that was one thing I was wondering about. And then when I was looking for that, I noticed that you have a PACE ordinance, what does it stand for? Property Assessed Clean Energy. And I was wondering if you were aware of whether there were properties that had participated in that. My understanding of it from quite a few years ago is that it's like a financing tool to encourage mainly commercial property owners to install solar energy on properties that they might be leasing, where it doesn't make sense to necessarily purchase a panel because they may not recoup the costs during the period that they're leasing the building for. And so I saw that you have an ordinance, and I was wondering if there had been sort of participation in that program, if you're aware of that.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It's my understanding that, when that was put into place, it was for exactly that, so that, the owners of qualifying properties could get the financing, related to, clean energy projects. But I don't have any data regarding, how successful that's been and who's taken advantage of that.
I just looked it up. It says it's for, the only thing I had thought it was for residential, and that's what I just found again, as opposed to commercial.
It's not commercial.
Well,
Okay.
what I just pulled up said Efficiency Maine offers homeowners can borrow up to 15 grand for 10 years, no fees and interest rates as low as 4.9%, which used to be a cheap interest rate. Now that's expensive.
That's high.
Yeah.
That's interesting, because when I first heard about this program, which was quite a few years ago, it was more, it was like enabling legislation that states had to adopt to allow commercial structures or commercial property owners. So that's interesting that it's just residential in this situation, and that maybe that's all that the state of Maine really allows for at this point.
What does PACE stand for? PACE?
Property Assessed Clean Energy is what the ordinance says, yeah. It's a program that I think has been floating around for quite a few years in I think California and Connecticut were two states that that participated early on. And I know that I heard someone in New Hampshire talk about, pushing for adoption of the program, I don't know, maybe like 6 years ago or so. And to be honest, I'm not sure where that went.
It said Maine adopted in 2011.
Maine did in 2011.
So then towns, I guess, had to adopt ordinances to buy into it. Is that what happened, Warner?
That's my understanding.
It looks
Yeah,
like,
it looks like the town adopted in 2011. I think enabling legislation looks like 2009.
Well, so it's sort of an incentive, I guess you could call it.
Yeah.
Hey, does anybody, I know this is a far-fetched issue, but does anybody know like coastal regions where islands may be owned by the town? Any solar options or any renewable energy options that are run on things like that? I know that's a controversial thing where not my backyard, and hopefully we won't have Kennedys that may not want it, but it's just a thought, I mean, I know we have islands that are there. Is there a happy medium on something like that?
You're talking about opposition to solar?
Well, just islands that are off the coast that there's nothing on, that may be owned by towns, wind power, for example, on something like that.
I think the Isle of Shoals
Yeah,
I think that they're off the grid, if I'm remembering correctly. Not that there are a lot of residents there, but there's a lot of people, tourists.
That is correct, Liz. They get at least the majority of their power from solar, I think.
No, I'm speaking more of like an island that's probably not suitable to live on. Like, for example, like say a Vaughan Island where a wind power could be put up. It would have to be obviously integrated with a line through the grid, but
Yeah,
I didn't know if other communities or somewhere remote they did stuff like that or not.
Tom, just a question. Are we at the end of your PowerPoint?
Yes, this is the last slide.
Oh, okay. I just didn't know if we wanted to go back to get you off the screen share.
Yeah, we can do that. I thought I would show you how much money you save if you go to a heat pump here. That's why I left that.
Yep.
Let's see. Good. You guys look bigger now.
I did it, Tom.
Yeah, I could tell it wasn't me. One thing I was thinking, you were talking about 20 minutes ago about the building codes evolving and making buildings tighter. Once you make the buildings tighter, it becomes trickier to maintain some indoor air quality at a healthy level.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, and that goes hand in hand with it. Whenever you look at the components of the energy code, now you've got to get into air exchange. You've got to up your air exchanges as well, just to deal with exactly that. To make sure you've got, that you've got good air transference that's happening. As well as making sure that let's say you've still got an oil burner, which in most cases folks don't. They're not running an oil furnace at this point. But if you've got any, say a propane stove, for example, making sure that you've got adequate makeup air and, things like that to run your appliances. It gets a bit more tricky and a little bit more complicated.
That's exactly what I was getting at. Recently, I've been reading reports that propane stoves in buildings that are really well insulated are starting to be recognized as a health issue.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, there've been, we haven't seen this specifically in the port, but I've definitely heard of instances where, somebody slams the front door on the house and it creates enough of a pressure vacuum there that puts pushes the pilot light out. Next thing you know, you've got, gas that's just, blowing into the house, that creates a health hazard. So, yeah, there are a number of different things that you've got to watch out for whenever you do that. So,
the negative pressure is, I know in my house, like I said, I did packed cellulose insulation, and it's packed so tight that, if we have a furnace, one flue, and a fireplace on the first floor, and if we don't have a cellar window cracked open, it will draw from the fireplace down through and go out the ash dump. And I remember the first couple of times we built a fire, and I go down, we're like, do you smell smoke? This seems really odd. And go down in the basement, it looks like a beatnik bar, and there's just so much smoke, and we had to open the windows because that negative pressure pulling in.
Yeah. But Werner, what you were saying earlier is the national code is moving in a certain direction, making buildings tighter. So that's that's going to require some adjustments in terms of how you cook and how you deal with gas.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. No, it's it's something that's having to be looked at more and more. I mean, I can't tell you when the last house that we saw with a new construction putting in an oil burner. Most of everything is now propane. That's going in. But most of those are closed combustion systems, anyways. For folks that are say they've got baseboard hot water. If they're running a gas boiler. Most of that's not really drawing its combustion air, from inside the house anymore. But it's those other appliances, it's the fireplaces, it's the cook stoves, it's the things like that have got an open flame, that can be tricky. But, most of the other things have got closed systems now. You go by a house and you'll see the two pipes sticking out the side of the house, one for the intake, one for the exhaust, for whether it's a propane hot water tank or boiler setup. So.
Yep. Just got to make sure that you shovel the snow away from those.
Yeah. I learned that one the hard way. Gosh, 15, 20 years ago in Delaware. We woke up one morning and wondered why we didn't have heat in the house, and we had a snowdrift that covered the intake for the furnace, and it kicked it off. So.
Yeah. We've had a few calls on that.
Yep. Right. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. Fire department. You've probably seen a fair amount of carbon monoxide.
Exactly.
I mean, gosh, how many carbon monoxide calls do you guys get, especially in the wintertime?
That's a good number.
Yep.
Okay. Any other discussion on this chapter, energy chapter? It's been a good discussion.
Very good.
Okay. Well, thank you, Tom
Well, you're welcome.
and Liz. So what's our homework assignment? Is it the number 5?
mean
Water resources.
The next chapter.
Water resources, yeah.
Yeah.
Water resources is our next chapter, and then I think marine resources is after that. Did you want to talk about trying to do 2 in one meeting?
How's the committee feel? Because we're going to have a month between here and our next meeting.
It depends on what do you think the chapters are? I mean, we've been going almost hour and 45 minutes on this, we'll just have to anticipate a long meeting.
That's true.
Well,
Let's stick with one then. Let's stick with one.
Okay.
If we need to double up later, we'll do that. That's a good point, Jim.
I don't mind doing it. I have kids and married. I can get away longer. There's always got to be something for me to do, the dishes or whatever. I'll stay longer.
Let's stick with the schedule. Review water resource chapter. On the meeting, number 4 is the adopt March 10th and October 6th minutes. Were those sent out, Werner? Do we have copies of those?
Yes, so everyone should have received, the March, copy of the March minutes. And then I think, one of the things, that we should discuss, is, in terms of what we want to do as far as minutes are concerned. Whether or not that's something that, you all as a committee want to have an active, an appointed, active secretary amongst the membership. I did speak with Lori about, the idea of having Trish Saunders do the minutes for growth planning off of the videos. So for those of you who don't know, Trish does, gosh, I think she does the minutes for just about every other committee in town. I know she does this for zoning board, planning board, the beach committee, and probably a couple of others that I don't know of. Full disclosure, it's also Dan's wife. So
So he would actually get to see her.
So that is an option that I spoke with Lori about, that she was she was fine, and I think Tricia's fine with that as well, if that's something that we want to pursue as a committee.
I guess one question, I think that's a good idea. I know that I can't really take careful notes and think at the same time. Maybe I could when I was younger, but no more. So I don't think I'm really an effective committee member and secretary at the same time.
Well, I think that's what we've seen, is that there's a big benefit, to not having a member, having to focus primarily on taking notes and not necessarily being able to participate well.
But the caveat to that is, what do you really need in minutes? Do you need to know that Paul said this when we can go to any video and see that if there was a question about who said what, we now have all this on video for maybe forever?
Yeah.
Maybe for as long as-
Yeah, I would agree with Paul, because I think the minutes that I read this afternoon were exceptional, but they were more of a transcript than they were minutes, which are traditionally more of a short, several lines on the topics discussed. And if there's anything that's needs to have a lengthier treatment, it can be done. But I don't know what the gold standard is for minutes. And I think Barbara did a great job. I think hers were succinct, and they were, I think they caught the flavor of all the meetings, and we do have the video. I'm also concerned that these folks have time to do it. So I guess they do. I mean, just wondering. I wouldn't be taking minutes. I just don't know what the expectation is in terms of length and detail.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, there's, you get into the legal requirements, of what your minutes need to have. And, I'd tell you that that's a pretty low bar, in terms of, what your legal requirements are. And I don't think that those would really, I would encourage you to have more than just the legal, the legal minimum, because that's just going to be who made what motion and what decision did we make, based off of the items that were listed on your agenda. And that doesn't really, give a good flavor in terms of what the committee's discussion was. But, but I agree, there's a happy medium between, a complete transcript of everything that's there, and, the overall kind of highlights of what the meeting was about. And certainly, the video, or the video recordings are supplemental, to that. So, I think it's the direction of the committee in terms of, I mean, is this something, do you all want to keep, do you want to do the minutes on your own? Just know that you have an option if you want it. And then, certainly, you can decide, how in-depth and in detail, you want your minutes to be. I think it's sometimes a little bit more artwork than it is, a set
It's a lot of editing.
requirement, right?
Mhm.
I've learned in life, especially in the military, if somebody volunteers for something, you let them do it. So if she's willing to do it, then I embrace her completely, and I know that I don't want to do it. I did it for twice, and I did not do a good job, but I'd embrace her if she's willing to do this one too.
I'll sort of recuse myself from the decision since it,
Yeah. Well, I will say, you do have an open, you do have an open position within the committee right now, that was vacated when Barbara left. So,
I'd
so-
be happy to do them for the next several meetings. And if they're satisfactory and they're headed in the right direction, I'm happy to continue. And if there's any reason for, if they're not complete enough or they're, not detailed enough or they're too short, then I take criticism pretty well. So I'd be happy to do it.
Well, let's give it a try then.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
sounds good.
Yeah, thank you for stepping up and doing that.
Sure.
I think when we're in the process, I think what we're doing at any particular time, impacts what kind of notes, what kind of minutes we want. If we're having a public session and we have actual members of the public and people are giving us feedback and suggestions on the energy section, then it's important that we capture those. And whether they make their way into the plan or not, the way they were recommended, that's one thing. We do have the benefit of Tom and Liz here also taking notes and recording and, capturing our comments.
Right.
So I think we do need to find a happy medium.
Yeah.
Is there ever the ability to just say, for details, reference the videos on the meeting minutes when it's documented?
If there's an important point that you want to make sure you get it the way it was actually said, reference to the video.
No, what I mean is, as the disclaimer, say at the bottom, if someone from the public goes to the website and reads the minutes, to just put that disclaimer on there, a footer or whatever, to say, for the detailed discussion, please refer to the videos. I don't know if that covers what Paul was suggesting as, instead of going into the weeds and completely documented it on the meeting minutes, to have them refer to the details of the video.
Right.
No, I think you're obligated for your official record to have it show up within your written minutes. The concern that I have, and this is something that we've seen, that we've seen happen here, is like whenever you start having electronic records, and a reliance on that, you run this risk of them being just outpaced pretty quick in terms of technology. Fortunately, we have a lot of good minutes, for past meetings, but we've also, had a fair amount of, audio cassettes that, we know that just from trying to play some of these that, they've just degraded, over time to the point where they're not usable anymore. So.
Hey, Paul?
Yeah, well, I have a question. Werner, can we, let's say someone makes a comment regarding page 9 of the energy section and suggested that we do X. Can we attach this package was attached to the agenda, but can we reattach it to the minutes so that the energy section is there in the minutes? So Janet can refer to, particular pages or numbers, and then it's there as part of it. So you just scroll back and you'd find the reference. You could read the context and then understand the comment.
Yeah, I think if you want to include, ultimately you wind up having to include that as part of your record, almost like an appendix, if that's,
To the minute.
if that, right, to the minutes. Yep.
It sounds as though we, at least from several comments, that we would like the minutes moving forward to be more detailed and references. Am I hearing that correctly?
Well, I would say they could be less detailed, but
Okay,
in that they don't need to be a
Okay.
transcript of
I
every
agree with that.
of every comment that's made. It is more of an art than a science. I agree with Werner on that. It's very, to get it right is tricky.
Yeah. But as a group, if we have minutes that are definitely able to be edited, then comments from the committee would be very welcome. If something is misrepresented or something is missed, a detail is missed, we have email, so we can just send a message to the secretary to say, would you consider adding this? Or I think someone mentioned this as well. I'm just saying, I think they're very fluid, so they could be updated or edited with, a conversation or an email
Yep.
by the committee.
Yeah, so the common practice, for that, in an ideal world, there's a draft version of the minutes that's circulated, the week
Right.
the week prior. We do ask, and I ask that if folks are going to provide comment back, that they do that just in a reply only to you.
Right,
So that
Okay.
it doesn't turn into
Right.
a group email conversation, because once we get into more than 3 people having a conversation, then it by statute that becomes a meeting, and it
correct.
We'll
creates a
have to
whole.
have a meeting notes for that meeting.
Oh, the meeting to talk about the meeting,
Yeah.
So, so we've we resolved that by asking folks that if you're going to do that, you
Right.
just do a reply only to, only back to you. So,
Right, and since we're typically meeting in every 2 weeks, if the minutes are, if I transcribe the minutes or I write the minutes and I send them out to the committee for comment, for edits, or for additions or deletions, I'll have that second week, if people get back in a day or 2 or 3, we'll have some more time to include that and do a second draft. And then
Correct.
give it
Yep.
send it back to everybody. We have a good turnaround time to do that. So,
yes.
Hey, does anybody know, this may be more, I was going to mention this to Paul as an attorney, like depositions and stuff that like Dragon Speaking, like software where everything is recorded and it gets transmitted into words and stuff like that. I mean, I'm sure there's places that do that, and I assume that would be the next step instead of getting, again, too much in the weeds of everything.
Yeah, but that's just like having a transcript, and we already have a transcript. We already, when I've wondered what's
Right,
happening.
I'm just saying if somebody wanted it in written form instead of just going into the weeds and getting too detailed in meeting minutes. I honestly think what Barbara did is to hit the summary is